welcome to the Reiki Women Podcast. My name is Carrie Varela with the Reiki Healing Society, and I'm here today with my colleagues and friends, Bronwen Logan of Reiki with Bronwen, and Michaela Daystar of Heartscapes Reiki. And, often Michaela, when she introduces us, she talks about this ongoing conversation. And so today's podcast is, I'm chuckling here because it really is like, sometimes we just get together on our Zoom calls, and it's like we just pick up where we left off last time. There's this conversation that just kind of keeps coming forward with us. And so today we were trying to find a topic to talk about today, and topic never really materialized, but the conversation just kept going, so we just rolled with it. You'll realize about halfway through we just decided to make this the podcast, our conversation that we've been having. It really started with women's leadership within Reiki, misogyny within the society as a whole, and just evolved naturally to what it will be at the end of the conversation. So we hope you enjoy kind of our rambling musings today. And we're also really excited to share with you a more formal discussion that we'll be having at the 8th Annual Reiki Raise Summit. So in the show notes, you'll see a link to that, that summit that's happening coming up this summer. So thanks again for joining us for this conversation. And enjoy it. The reason why I feel like it can relate to women of marginalized communities is because myself, I've been marginalized as a woman, and it's, my marginalization is definitely not as much and as, profound as people from marginalized communities, but nevertheless, I've experienced in my own life as a woman because of.
I don't know if you can say that. Look, I remember when I was a long time ago, but when I was studying stuff on this subject, and what always amazed me is that women are 50% of the population, right? And yet we have, if you think of all the different minority groups, well, maybe I'm talking about something else here actually, but if I'm thinking about minority groups and how we have supported, both men and women have supported minority groups, so whether, if I'm thinking of the LGBTQ community, I know there's a lot of issues there still, but the changes that have occurred, there have been a lot of changes, or, other sort of minority groups. It always has amazed me that there seems to have been a lot more change in those areas and less change for women. I don't know if I'm right, but that does seem the way. And it always amazes me because we are 50% of the population. And yet for women to come together or something, I'm not sure what it is, but to stand together, to speak out is sometimes, it's like sometimes we lack that, you were talking about empowerment before. We lack that empowerment to step forward as a whole to take our place where it should be as an equal in this society. Whereas I feel like a lot of, this is just a total, what do you call it? Generalization, but a lot of minorities, because they have been pushed down, can somehow come together and somehow create a voice and, move forward and get that seen. Sometimes I feel like women just don't manage to do that. I don't know if I'm right.
Well, one of the things that's challenging about this conversation and why it's nuanced is that there's women inside of all of the groups that you named. And so, women as a large category is a much more diverse category than Black women or queer women. It's like, so when you talk about all women coming together, we can't really get into that without looking at, the ways in which our identities intersect with each other. And so, for example, when the feminist movement in the United States was kind of in its expression in the 1970s, it was a very white middle class centric movement where you did have women coming together as a single voice, but it was white middle class women's single voice, and Black women and queer women and, you know, lots of other types of working class women were not represented in that voice. And so I think it's a tricky thing to say. I think there's a lot more nuance to it than saying these marginalized groups can come together and speak with one voice, but women can't, because all of those groups include women. And when we, you know, want to say there's a women's voice, that's a whole lot of, you know, a lot of voices. So, you know, all of that is kind of inside of.
Do you think that women in marginalized groups are less focused on the fact that they're women?
I think women in marginalized groups are much more aware of the intersections of those aspects in themselves. I think as white women, we tend to be less aware that we are white women, whereas a Black woman is very aware that she is a Black woman. And so her voice and her ability to connect with other people that she identifies with is going to be informed by more consciousness of both of those parts of her identity. You know, a lesbian woman is very aware that she is both a lesbian and a woman. Whereas as a white woman, I have to consciously put myself in the mindset to be like, I am white. That means very specific things. I'm American. That means very specific things. And I'm a woman, and looking at all of that. It's like the whiteness and the Americanness is just kind of like the water, you know, it's the air around me. It's like, it's not front and center. Whereas a Black woman is like not going to be allowed to forget that she's a Black woman.
Yeah, I get
that makes sense.
Yeah, I do see. So there is more going on there for 100%. So does that mean that we can't then stand together as women, is what you're saying, unless there is a greater equality, is what you're saying, within?
I think there's not a uniform experience of woman. So when we say stand together as women,
well, but there is a standardized experience of us being marginalized ourselves. Yes.
Right. And I think it's also about finding that common bond within Reiki. Well, what does it mean to be a Reiki woman, and what challenges have we faced, and why is Reiki such a particular tool that has helped women find more empowerment, right? And find more of a core identity, more strength to pursue perhaps even career goals within Reiki. You know, I was listening to a podcast this morning, and just like the main focus was 1974. In 1974, in the United States, they allowed women to open their own bank accounts without a male co-signing.
Yeah.
1974. Like, that's less than 50 years ago.
Yeah.
That's less than 50 years. And we have thousands and thousands of epigenetic trauma, of ancestral trauma, generational trauma held in women's bodies because of how much we have been oppressed in society to fit one standardized norm, which is to have children, make babies, be a householder, and given no access and no freedom within society to create our own identity. And so I think that's why Reiki is so powerful for women, and why we want to highlight that, bring that forward, but also recognize that right now within Reiki, leadership is being given to men. And this is just the way of the world. So we have to, why I think this conversation does parallel this whole topic on spiritual appropriation is that, like, for a marginalized community, we can do as much healing as you want to do, with all that you face. But at a certain point, you have to recognize society is the ill thing. And I've been hurt and impacted by society. So it's also about making change.
But we're society.
Community change.
We're not outside of society.
Right.
So it's not like it's them and us or me, is it? Right. I mean, us. We are the ones making the decisions and the choices, and so it is up to us. I love what you said, that about us, that you know, within the system of Reiki, we have given a lot of, as the system of Reiki have given opportunity to women, right? Which is to be able to earn an income, for example, to have their own businesses. And it has been quite, it's been very accessible in that sense.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So, and yet there's more work to do.
I mean, I find it really difficult, actually, Michaela, what you just said, because it feels like it almost, look, I understand what you're saying completely, actually, but it feels like it's holding those things are holding women back, right? But they must also be holding men back.
Yeah, in some different ways, for sure.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, there's a constriction in any structure, even for those that are benefited by the structure. And then we all have different experiences inside of it. I mean, just to be totally transparent, my experience growing up, like me as a person, I have not directly experienced what I would call marginalization or discrimination or being held back because I'm a woman. I've, been very lucky to be in a family that centers women's leadership, to have grown up in a part of the state, a state and a region that does the same. So I myself have not experienced much overt sexism that has constrained my life. I have observed it my whole life. I have, I'm aware of how it shows up, in the larger structures that contain us. But I feel very grateful that I don't feel like my voice has been stifled because I'm a woman. And I feel very grateful for that. And like that's been a privilege of my particular upbringing, for whatever happenstance it has been. So that's not to say, so I think because of that, it's easier for me to kind of sit back and say, let me look at marginalization and oppressive structures more broadly, because I'm not feeling pressured by it personally, right? And again, I realize that's a privilege of the facts of my life, that I didn't choose, but that just happened to be the way they are. So it's that's just so like when I'm kind of pulling the lens back and like, yeah, but let's look at it this way. Part of that is like I don't feel a lot of personal pressure around the structure of sexism, and I'm really grateful for that. But I know that sometimes it can make it look like I'm brushing it off as an issue, in a sense, if that makes sense.
I mean, when I was in my 20s, I thought that, the world was a total equal place for men and women. And that, I was out there doing my thing, right? Okay. Go forward 30 years. And then I looked back and I went, and I looked at that era, and I looked at what was going on, and I realized that it wasn't the case at all. But I was so brainwashed myself into thinking that I had it all, that it was all, but it actually wasn't. And that was a really interesting experience to know that I was just sort of going through the steps of being a woman in my world, and really allowing a lot of things to happen and not doing anything about it. There was a sense of frustration, I guess. There was a sense of frustration with the way that things were, but not really sort of like recognizing in my mind that is like putting it all together and understanding why I felt frustrated, or yeah. why I could be in situations like if I, if you walk down the street and a man would yell out at you or whatever, and why I didn't take that as a compliment, and I didn't understand why, when wasn't I meant to take that as a compliment, and oh, I'm so confused by all of this, all those sorts of experiences, and they were just normal things. So I don't know. I hear what you're saying. I think that I think we can't help but be affected by
Absolutely.
the inequality that exists in this world, and trying to name it and to understand what our experiences are is really difficult. And I think that's why doing this podcast is a really positive thing, and because it gives us the opportunity to think about these things and talk about these things which sit there beneath our lives, just moving along, and we don't know, we don't recognize them or see them or hear them, and trying to put some names to them is a really valuable thing, a helpful thing, I think. Yeah,
Absolutely.
mm.
Yeah, I mean, certainly each individual one of us or small groups of us can't fix everything. And I think that, for me, I've always looked at things from the relational perspective. So within a group that I'm in, I can't fix everything about what's going on in the world, but I can address dynamics that are happening in that group. So for example, I went to school and then worked for 12 years at a women's college. So this is a women's college. The container is women's leadership. I ran a women's leadership program at this women's college. So the container was women and women's leadership. And so because it's almost like we set aside, held at bay the presumption that women are going to be marginalized. Like that is not the case in this small space of this one college. The other places of tension and discrimination and imbalance were right. So then inside of that container, we were able to wrestle with those other things and come to places of, not fixing, right, but addressing and continuing progress towards more spaciousness, love, compassion, all of the things that we are engendering inside of ourselves with the system of Reiki, doing that in community, and really, forwarding that, because the idea that women are, forced to the side was just not the case in that space. And so I think what I'm getting at there is that we can't fix everything out in the world 100%, but we each have a sphere of influence. And inside of that sphere of influence, we can, do the work to reveal places where there's tension and where there's difficulty, and work there. And then, like the hara shining out in all directions, that tiny little microcosm of healing, ripples out from there, because that's what we can control.
Did you just, I'm curious, did you find that, in that environment, because it's still within the constructs of our society, yes, it's a container of women, yeah, but did you feel that that things did work differently, or did you feel that that they still kept working in the ways that we do in our greater world, which is still dominated by men and a certain male way of doing things, if you like?
Inside of that container, the space was not dominated by physically male people.
No,
like the vast majority of the people there were women, and the vast majority of the people in leadership were women. However, the structures of the systems that the college was inside of course, were duplicated, right? So that includes hierarchical structures, that includes a focus on productivity and valuing our worth based on our productiveness and grading and all of that. It's a school, just certain aspects of culture that, of course, were duplicated in the structure of a university in the United States. And that was something that we're very aware of. And there were places where we would say, okay, can we push that? Can we shift away from something? So certain classroom spaces would, get rid of hierarchy and would do grading differently. So it's not this like productivity based valuing of your abilities and so on. But generally speaking, as an institution, it's certainly governed by the rules of society. And that was absolutely reflected. But I think the difference is we were very aware of it. And there was a lot of opportunity to like step back and say, hey, this is fucked up because of society, and look at how we're reproducing it right here in this space that is supposed to be so progressive. Can we do something about that? And it was this kind of ongoing experiment in that. And it's like with constant tension, like just constant tension around those kinds of tussles. But it wasn't around men and women. It was around, but it was around what it's always about, which is power dynamics. Who has power and in what way, and how does that get asserted, and how does or doesn't that power get used to bring forward the power of people who don't necessarily have it. Generally speaking, the way that showed itself was around race, was around, whiteness and people of color, and was around sexuality and then more later gender. So, cisgendered women, white women being absolutely the strongest voice on campus, and then slowly giving up more of that space, more of that power to people who were not cisgendered white women.
Well, I think one of the big issues is confidence.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, for us 3 women doing a podcast, for example, no point getting up here and doing this if you don't have some level of confidence.
Sure. And
because, well, anyway, you know what I'm saying. So I'm thinking that, so what you're saying, I get that very much. And that, if someone, I mean, I think a lot of women struggle with that in our society, and having the confidence to get up and take their power. So that idea that we were talking about earlier, just about how empowering something like the system of Reiki can be, because it does give us that opportunity to have a space, have a place that we can think about what we're doing, talk about what we're doing, and really become I'm going to use a controversial word here, but a master of our experience, right? So so really taking that whole culture in, and understanding and learning and becoming someone who really can teach something and have a certain sense of power in that. But what do you think about then the structure? If we're talking about the structure of society, that's why I was curious, Michaela, the structure of society in the system of Reiki.
Mm-hmm.
Carrie. Well, personally, are we like just filming right now, or should we
just flowing? Yeah, this is just it. This is the podcast right now. Yeah.
Well, we're just go for it. Oh, really? Okay. Well, I think when you talk about hierarchical structures within the system of Reiki, that's something that's always really been a rub for me. And, personally, I think that this whole idea of kind of top-down enlightenment coming from, the head downward, it's problematic. And I think a more women's focused enlightenment or embodiment of their own healing process is an inner to outer, an awareness of this inner world, and then bringing that more of this inner world into their outer world. So I think of that as more divine feminine way of healing And also just, and like you suggested, Michaela, losing some of the hierarchy, right? That there's so much hierarchy in masculine ways of being, in masculine structures. And a lot of that's kind of being mirrored within the system of Reiki. So it's like, you know, you're nothing special until you've trained with somebody, so many clicks away from the founder of Reiki, or, um, uh, you know, there's also structures around, how many students you taught. And so, but that's really nothing to do with Reiki, right? It's like, once you've done the trainings and once you've embodied this practice, you're part of a bigger circle. And it is that, it's a circle without hierarchy, because that's not how the universe sees us. The universe sees us for our own unique place within culture, society. You don't have to be this very accomplished Reiki master to share this work with somebody else. And even if you are a very accomplished Reiki master, it doesn't make you better than somebody who's just using Reiki for their own healing, because they're on a different path in life, and that's not their path, and that's not their journey. So I think of, you know um, a more feminine way of bringing this practice forth, I think there needs to be some change within the system of Reiki in order to really bring this mindset shift forward. And it's an important one, and that's really one of the focuses and reasons why I created the Reiki Healing Society, because I felt like there was a better way. I felt there was like a better expression, or better is not the right word, but a different expression of how we can be together in community, and how we can relate to the whole practice of healing, not from this kind of top down experience of it, but from an inner to outer. And I think what's lost in the top down is the grounding, and really seeing the earth and our foundation as so sacred and so important. Um, and yeah, I don't see that kind of coming forward within Reiki. And so that was one push.
Yeah, what you said about the top down thing, I see that more as a Western sort of thing than an Eastern sort of thing, if you want to put it into
Well, and I think this is really what stands out to me, Carrie, about what you just shared, is that, when we work with Reiki from its original form, what we see is a Hatha up practice, right? Like we see first diamond, second diamond, third diamond. We see, we have a map that starts with groundedness, starts with the internal, right at the center of our body, right at the center of the earth, the connection between those two things, and prioritizes that, and then sends us to the mind, right? Instead of prioritize, because, what is a hierarchy if not the mind dominating over everything else, right? And then how that shapes the structures that we create. And so we see this inversion of that structure right there within the core of the origins of Reiki. And Bronwen, I think that's why, one of the reasons that your article about being a woman of Hatha was so impactful, because it really spoke directly to that, right? To the mirroring of that spiritual concept to our physical bodies and to our connection with the earth in a way that was, really eye-opening and empowering, I think, for a lot of people who read it. So yeah, I totally agree with you, Carrie.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, like I said, I totally get what you're saying, though I do think that in the Eastern practice itself, that it's not necessarily about. So when you talk about energy coming down, I just see that as sort of like a oh, I don't know. I don't want to say names, but like a certain yes, maybe masculine, but a Western sort of concept of if I look at the Western style of the system of Reiki, yeah, so it's very much, as you say, it is an external sort of practice about doing. It's all coming from here, yeah. But if we look at the Eastern style, it is coming from the Hatha. So it's not necessarily, I wouldn't say that's necessarily a masculine thing. However, I do get this thing, what you were just saying, Michaela, about this being a more masculine dominated area, and really coming from this, and how that is representative energetically of an imbalance. And yeah, so yeah, I guess I see that a little bit differently.
Yeah, and if we look at, the ways in which those concepts then get reflected in society, right? So the larger container, we see a privileging of the mind, a prioritizing of thought, of reason, of problem solving, of, thinking. We're uh, rewarded for strong mind, right? And strong, not meaning, not in the way that we would talk about it within our Reiki practices, but strong in terms of the intellect. And we are not as rewarded, at least overtly, for things like intuition, for rest, for stillness, for perception, for relationship, and for working through challenges and moving through the world from a place of feeling and intuition rather than logic and reason and problem solving. And one of the things that's been so powerful about practicing Reiki in the ways that you've taught me to is that it doesn't say that those aspects of the mind are unimportant, but it says firstly that the mind is so much more than just thinking and reason and problem solving, and that it has to be in balance with the body, with the energy, with the heart, with intuition, with feelings, and that's when we're in our full capacity, and that's when we're really able to move through the world in an enlightened state, right? Our question from earlier, what is enlightenment, that we might get into on another episode, having our mind in balance rather than being the dominant show. And in our society, in our Western modern culture, and for quite some time, the mind has dominated. It's part of kind of patriarchal white supremacist systems is to be very mind dominating. And that shows up in all kinds of different ways. And, again, back to working in a university, definitely could see that in full display, working in a higher ed context.
I was just thinking about the word confidence, that I used before, and was saying, oh, well, if we have the confidence, then we can move forward. Yep. But then I was thinking, what is confidence? Because actually, see, this is what I was saying. We still exist within this male existence, and still value the qualities that you were talking about, Michaela, the qualities that within confidence could be all sorts of qualities. Yes. Confident in. Yeah. And it doesn't necessarily mean confident in having a big mouth, Bronwen. You know what I'm saying? Like it can be confidence in stillness, right? And that, I think, is, for me, this is the difficulty living in society. We spoke before about society. What is the society? It's very hard for us to actually see the difference that there could be. Yeah. And what are we valuing? Are we valuing things that have true value?
Did either of you find that, either for your own experience or what you observed in others and in the world, that the disruption to our systems that was caused during the COVID, let's say the first 2 years, where the disruption was the greatest, that forced us to see those things that you're talking about? Because I think, back to the idea of, it's just the water that we're swimming in, right? It's hard to see it. It's hard to see, what does it mean to live in a patriarchal white supremacist culture? Like, what does that mean, right? You have to be able to step back from it and actually see what seems like very normal structures and ways of thinking and beliefs as something imposed, and that's not necessarily the way it has to be. And so I'm curious if you saw in yourself or others a greater ability to kind of see some of those structures because they were disrupted during that time.
I think absolutely. I mean, there was so much that was just like that the shadow world was really uncovered. It's like our shadow was totally uncovered through the disruption that the pandemic caused. And I can also speak, like, I think an additional layer in the United States was having a certain person being a president, and just the chaos and that was stirred up through our political instability, and how much pressure and how much of our political institutions were being challenged. Um, so you and the pandemic gave us an opportunity to step back, like way back, right? Like in a way that I don't think we will ever have that opportunity again in this lifetime, because everything was, stopped, and our all the wheels stopped turning, and I got to look at my life. I can speak for myself. I got to look at my life and give myself a really long sojourn in what's working and what's not working, and why is this not working, and what is this unhealed trauma, unhealed stuff that's inside me. And yeah, there was a lot that I had just been able to kind of brush under the rug, because the wheels of my life were moving so fast. So to have that step back was to really work inside the shadow, and really start to uncover those unconscious elements of my own healing that really needed to be sorted out. Well, maybe they didn't need to be happening, but it was just an opportunity to do that. So
Yeah, I just heard yesterday on the radio, they were talking about violence against people who work in retail during COVID. Yeah, it went up in the first year of COVID. It went up by 25%. In the second year of COVID, it went up by 50%. And it wasn't just verbal, physical violence. So people throwing things at people who work in shops. So it's like, and you're thinking, why would that be? But it's that people sitting back, and what comes out sometimes of that, right? What comes out of not being in this motion. Right. Yeah.
And having that motion disrupted without having a firm foundation to land on, because I think about the experience of that disruption alongside a dedicated Reiki practice, and the ability to like get stable and get paused and get restful and get observant, as opposed to the anxiety that I saw so many others falling into, which I had, I felt that, because it's so understandable, right? That there would be this, this tension and all of this energy that builds up when everything stops and there's that disruption. And that it was a missed opportunity. And so when I think about, if we even just kind of circle it back to the question that we started with, of like how to make space for more diversity inside the system of Reiki, or more voices to be heard in any culture, any community. One way that I would answer that or think about that is to cultivate this balance between stability, personal stability. I personally feel grounded and safe and stable in myself, and that's what the system of Reiki does for me, alongside disruption. Intentional disruption, right? The 2020 was an unintentional disruption, right? But there are times when we can bring intentional disruption and shifts and put the brakes on what's happening inside of our own life and our communities, in the system, in Reiki spaces, whatever it's looking like. And I think that that's one way to increase, voice and presence and open up the field for more voices, is to disrupt the structures that's containing those voices, but after building a sense of stability, so that we don't go into that chaos spiral and that anxiety spiral. And I've seen things like that in the context of organizations, moments in my work in the university, as I said, where there's this disruption with the preparation of being ready for stepping into the space that opens up when we disrupt. And having confidence, as you've been talking about, is just intertwined in all of that. And I feel like there's another conversation that might want to happen around confidence and how that relates to the system of Reiki and possibly disruption as well.
Well, how do we disrupt the system of Reiki? I'm not setting off any bombs, Michaela. Okay.
Good. Excellent.
No, seriously, how do we disrupt?
Yeah. Well, I mean, speaking is the first way, right? And so, we've created this space where we can speak our minds. We've also been invited to speak at the Reiki Raise Healing Summit, which is coming up. So the three of us will be working with questions related to this about the presence of women and women's leadership, where it does and does not show up inside of Reiki, how we can why it's important to pay attention to that and what we can do about it. So that's one way that we can disrupt, is by telling the truth, by speaking in various spaces and, saying the quiet things out loud, right? Saying the things that we feel, but don't always feel like we can say out loud. That is always a really powerful form of disruption.
So it's Reiki Women Podcasts.
Yeah, I think the Reiki Women Podcast. I think it's also just speaking your own personal experiences, and I totally agree. Speaking up is the first step, because there's many things within Reiki that I just felt either uncomfortable with or just didn't really align with my own worldview. And there's this kind of sense of shallowness, and it's ironic, I think, because the Reiki is a very deep practice. It's very profound and deep practice. But the way I felt like Reiki was being practiced for, the first 10 years or so that I've practiced it, it felt very shallow, because, formed maybe 100 years ago. And then there was all these changes that happened to the system of Reiki, and it just became this, whatever it wanted to be, or whatever you wanted it to be, kind of experience. But my own personal experience of Reiki was quite deep and profound, and there was this depth to it. I also framed my inquiry into Reiki with other healing modalities that are also ancient, and the roots of Reiki are ancient. They come from ancient systems of practice, ancient aspects of religion, through Buddhism, through Japanese Shintoism, etc. And so, when I thought about particularly yoga and Reiki, how they came together, Reiki or yoga had this really profound depth of practice around connection to nature, also a profound, deep practice around our relationship with our body, and healing and food. And also, one thing that I've been exploring too is about astrology, the connection between yoga and astrology. And so that there's like just, you keep swimming down. There's just so much more to explore. And to me, the practice, my internal practice of Reiki, was like deep in that deeper realm. But the Western expression of it was still very shallow, and it included a lot of half truths, like just even focusing on a particular element within nature. Like, you can't do that. You have to focus on all of them, because they need to be balanced. And we've already talked about kind of the incongruity of bringing chakras and Reiki together when there's this whole system of subtle body awareness that the Japanese have. So that's my answer, is just speaking to it. And I think that revolution is there to happen, but it also takes people to reinvest in it. Another aspect, I think, of this question, which I think is really interesting, is that a lot of people, the way that they were learned or trained in Reiki is like, oh, you just get your attunement, and then Reiki's there for you, and you have it your whole life, and that's it, right? And there's no practice, there's no daily connection to it, there's no structure around how it is that I relate to this practice. And so people have been empowered by ignorance, right? And like a feeling of, oh, I'm master of this system or master of this practice, but I haven't taken a training, I haven't read a book on Reiki, or whatever it is. I haven't invested more time and energy to really understand Reiki, And so that there's this churning that needs to happen, I think, and a willingness to let go of the story of what we were trained in Reiki in order to really understand what it is today. And it's changed so much over the last 20 years. So I think if you're really serious and love Reiki, you need to keep investing and learning more about Reiki, studying Reiki, and might look different for any different kind of person, but all right, friends. Well, we hope you enjoyed this ongoing conversation that we are having within the Reiki Women Podcasts. And we talked about a lot of different things about women's leadership, misogyny within the world of Reiki. And we kind of landed in this place talking about how we create disruption in the world of Reiki. And we'd love to hear more about that particular topic from you. Do you think disruption is necessary? Do you see that the system of Reiki is in alignment with your worldview? Where are we out of integrity within the system of Reiki? Absolutely would love to hear your thoughts. And also, join us for the Reiki Rays 8th Annual Summit, and we'll be talking about the role of women's leadership within the system of Reiki. And so we're really excited about that. There's a link to register for the summit in our show notes. And also, we are filming episode 91 of the Reiki Women Podcast. So we have something fun planned for our 100th episode, and we hope that you can be a part of it. So stay tuned about what's happening for our 100th episode, and just join us in this kind of celebratory, excited place where we just get to pick up the phone and have a great conversation about Reiki, no matter what the topic, if it doesn't materialize or not. We are so grateful for your support of our podcast over the last couple of years, and we really couldn't do it without you. So thank you for all that you contribute. Thanks for listening. We appreciate you, and have a fantastic day.
Bye.
Bye.